My name is Samantha Youssef. I started out as a hand-drawn character animator for Disney feature animation, and now I continue to work as an animator, character designer, visual development artist, and I do a lot of, I guess, consulting and training at a variety of studios in the industry, from gaming, VFX to feature animation, incorporating what I learned in 2D and helping translate those skills for how CG artists would use them. I couldn't quite identify, I couldn't pinpoint a time. I grew up always loving hand-drawn animation. My parents told me that even before I was 3 years old, I was always asking them to pause videos of Disney films, and I was redrawing the frames. So it's always been part of my life that I loved drawing these characters, and specifically being drawn to animation. So I can't remember a moment or a time. It was just always there. And I didn't know, because when I grew up, we didn't really have the internet. So I didn't go to an arts-oriented school, so I didn't know that it was something that you could actually study. I would buy all these art of books and read about different animators in magazines and stuff, but it was only later on that I found out that you could go to college, and that's when I actually started actively pursuing it, but I always loved it. I worked on Tarzan 2, then it was Brother Bear 2, then it was Lilo and Stitch 2, then it was Bambi 2, which was, I think, one of my favorite productions that I've worked on, mostly because of the way that I was able to integrate with the other artists on the team. The directors were the same directing team from Beauty and the Beast, which was before my time as an animator, so I was very excited to work with under that umbrella. And Andreas Deja was on my character team, and so I worked closely with him every day, and I got to learn from him. So having that experience for me, and then the actual process of Bambi 2, they put us through really extensive training. So we went, there was a very long training period before we actually started production. We went on site to deer reserves to spend days just out in these fields drawing deer, and we had deer skeletons and deer anatomy and just all this extensive deer training. So I felt like I went back to school. I felt completely disconnected from a work environment. And then when we came on production, working with these animators and these artists and everything, it was just really very exciting. And so I think that experience, that whole production experience, was the closest that I've been to that was like what they used to do back in the in the older days, because quota's gone up over the years and production experience at the studio had changed, but that was really a lot like the behind the scenes experiences that I had grown up with. So I think that Bambi 2 for myself was my favorite production. All figurative or character or creature-oriented animation, whether it's in-game animation for video games, whether it's VFX and blockbuster franchises, whether it's feature animation, life drawing is the key to understanding body mechanics. There is a big trend, obviously, to use a lot of reference footage now for the scenes that you're doing, but knowing what to look for in your reference is discovered through life drawing. It is, I think, best discovered through life drawing. I should re-articulate that. And life drawing really, not only does it give you, an observation of the human body in motion, but it also gives you an opportunity to observe the model moving between their poses and to see how the body works, to see how weight shifts, to see how muscles contract, to see, to get a sense of life and gesture in that moment, to get a spark in that moment that you might not notice when you're looking at stagnant footage or frame by frame footage. Graphic note-taking, I think, is something that's always underestimated as well. Statistically, people say that you learn better when you attend a conference when you take notes. Even if you don't read the notes, the act of writing when you're listening to a speaker helps you retain the information better. And I believe that that's what drawing is. I believe that that's what life drawing is that even if you're not doing hand-drawn animation, even if you don't need to draw like, you know, Glenn Keane or something, the act of doing it makes your observations stronger. It makes you more in tune with what you're doing and have a better feel for things and translate that better. So I think it's essential. I think it's essential whether you're working in 3D, stop motion, or hand-drawn animation. The impressionist quality that 2D animation allows for itself, I think that people relate more to something graphic or relate to something, when something is so realistic, or when you see a photograph, you don't personally identify with it as much. Whereas when you see a graphic, like a symbol of a woman or a symbol of a man on washrooms or something, we identify with that graphic symbol, that it can apply to you, that it can represent you. I think there's a lot of value with giving the audience the opportunity to fill in the gaps a little bit. If you, let's say you have a tree full of leaves, if you paint every leaf, it doesn't feel as real as if you paint some leaves and leave some vague. That creates a much more believable, identifiable experience for the person looking at the artwork than that it feels like they're there looking at that tree on that day. And so I do think that allowing the audience to fill in some gaps, but by choosing, not because of negligence, it does create, I think, a more believable, immersive experience, ironically. There's a lot of live action remakes of classic animated films, and I don't particularly think that they turn out better. I don't think that, I think that stories need to be retold always, like that cultures change. I think people are the same. I think we're the same people that love the same stories as we did 2,000 years ago. But culturally we change, trends change, fashions change. And I think that stories, I'm not against stories being retold, good stories being retold. I think that there is something to be said for that, that maybe they need to be retold for a newer audience to appreciate them. But that being said, if they're being retold for the sake of just the medium, to put them in a different medium and not telling them in a better way, I don't really see the purpose of that, and I don't think that they're being told in a better way. I think that the original animated films that were done were beautiful masterpieces and beautiful works of art that anyone would still appreciate. So I think, again, it always depends on how the film is done, but for the most part, I feel that there are stories that suit the medium very well, and I think that it would be nice to choose to use the 2D medium for those stories, and I hope that studios would. I'm not pessimistic about it because I'm not pessimistic about 2D animation in general, because I believe that it lives on in the hearts of many artists that uphold it. But I don't think right now that the major studios, I don't think logically, coming from a business perspective, that they would opt to invest in a project like that right now, not when they already have a pipeline in effect to create and tell stories in an amazing way already. So in CG at least. So I don't think that they would take that risk. There's too many shareholders involved right now. There's too many. It's just not practical from that standpoint. Artists, yes, I think every artist would love to see these films realized in 2D, but they're not the ones that are responsible to the company in the same way. So. Unfortunately, I'm not sure if that would be something that would be seen in the future. Although I hope that things like Klaus will maybe set a new path for the industry, which is what I'm crossing my fingers for. And I think that if anyone's going to do it, they would do it. They would do a great job. Spa Studios is amazing, and Sergio is, unrivaled in his talent. So I think that. it could happen there. So it's really just in North America that we have this discussion of will 2D survive. But that being said, I think it is also in North America that the ballet of 2D animation, I suppose if I were to label it in dance terms, the highest technical level of classical animation was developed and mastered here at Disney, at DreamWorks. Just on a technical level, I don't want to say on subjective artistic levels, but on a technical level, that technique that of keyframe hand-drawn animation, you know, for the sake of the legacy at least, you would hope that Disney would keep that very active within their studio. And some of the artists are still there that haven't yet retired, you know, from the golden age of Disney. They're still involved in doing draw-overs of some of these, you know, projects, and they're not necessarily doing 2D animation anymore. And it is sad. It would be nice that there was something exclusively devoted to maintaining that craft. It's like saying that classical ballet and symphony orchestras would be erased from our culture, erased from our history. And it will be if it's not supported. And it's an art form that deserves that recognition. It took almost 100 years for the artists at Disney to develop the tools of traditional animation. And I think that it would be heartbreaking that this art would just be forgotten, that the means to produce this art are forgotten. And but it needs that. That's the thing, is that it needs that kind of support. So I think it is important. I think it's an important part of our culture, and it's so young, and yet, I mean, it's a century old, but it's still young. So yeah, to me, it's really important. I think that's the part that I don't want to say breaks my heart, because it's not gone, but that's what I fear for, is that this beautiful form of expression, and such a unique form of expression, because you bring drawings to life. And I look at a drawing that John Singer Sargent drew 100 years ago, and it breathes life in a single drawing. And or you go to you go and see paintings at the National Gallery, and you see like these impressionist paintings, and to have a world where they didn't exist would be horrible. So to think to not have this medium where you could take that and bring it to life on a whole other level, and capture people's hearts and offer artists that form of expression as well, I think it would be, I just think it's horrible to think if it didn't exist. So I think it's, for that reason, most importantly, it needs to exist. I just remember when Roy Disney left the company, and I remember that being very heartbreaking. I remember coming into work, and there was a letter left for all of us at our desks. It was beautiful. There was this little Pinocchio, I still have it actually, a little Pinocchio watercolor sketch on the paper, and handwritten, and we all had copies, but Roy Disney handwrote this letter that he was leaving the company, and he was apologizing to all the artists. He wanted us all to know that he was very proud to be part of the company, and that he was sad that he had to leave, and that he wouldn't be there to see his uncle's legacy through. We were still drawing and producing animated films after that, but that to me, after that, was a big change in the company, or at least from my perspective, that's when I felt that things changed a little bit. I don't know what was going on at a corporate level, but I wonder if maybe he was the last voice to say that we want to keep these things going, because this is what my uncle created, this is what the company was founded on, this is how we want to continue these Disney traditions. So I don't know if maybe things changed for that reason. I don't necessarily regret how the company's changed because I love the films that are coming out. I think that they're producing such beautiful films. But I think that things started shifting a little bit like that. And yeah, I think it's certainly, I mean, the artists changed for sure. There are some people, I think slowly, a lot of people left. You know, a lot of people decided that they wanted to continue to draw or do different things, so they just found that Disney wasn't the place for them anymore and they left. Some of the older artists, you know, I know John Ripa and Byron Howard, among many others, are still there at Disney. So it was different for everyone. I wouldn't say that the studio certainly didn't change, that there was a big emotional shift, that it became melancholy, but I certainly think that people, you know, there was a feeling of change, and some people decided that it wasn't for them, and some people were just transitioned into other departments that some found new love for that. Some found that they liked storyboarding more and that they liked designing more than they did animating. So there, in some ways, maybe there was an energy level increase in that way. So I think that was, but I remember when that happened, and that for me was a bit of an emotional shift or feel in how the company was. And I remember, I keep that, well, I don't know if you can't see it in the film, but there's a drawing up on my wall there that Andreas Deja gave to me, that he drew for me, and he said, you know, hold on to your pencil and stuff. And I've always thought about that too, because I was always like him, very passionate about drawing for the rest of my career, and even though I've done both CG animation and hand-drawn animation, my love really is in creating drawings. So, but I think that, yeah, I would say that was the time that I remember the most in there being a shift. Otherwise, I think it just maybe became a bit more, not production oriented, but quotas kept going up, so it was really about like getting the work done. I think the one big shift, though, that just to go back to that I did notice in the change from hand-drawn to CG is that in the hand-drawn days, everyone in the studio drew. Whether you were a background artist, a layout artist, a storyboard artist, you know, an animation artist, a cleanup artist, all departments drew. And we always had our internal academy where we were going to drawing classes, and it was something that every artist in the studio shared and that we admired about each other, so that, you know, sometimes I didn't necessarily draw in the same way that a storyboard artist would draw, because as an animator, our draftsmanship had to be very, we couldn't be loose or vague about our drawing, whereas with a story artist, you could be a bit more gestural. And so, you know, I would see these drawings that Chris Sanders would do, and we could never draw our scenes like that, but I would love how he drew, and you know, and so we all could share drawing together. And one thing that I feel is a little different now at Disney, whenever I go in, there is still obviously a unity of the artists working on this great project in film, but I do feel that artists in one department don't necessarily know the artists in another department, because you know, animators are not necessarily drawing unless they want to. The concept artists are in a different department. The background artists or people that are designing the environments are different. So it's more compartmentalized in that way, and that was something I really enjoyed, was that we there was so much joy in sharing a love of drawing with each other and an admiration of each other's drawing abilities, I think, at the studio in those older days. So I do miss that part of it. My first advice to animators interested in hand-drawn animation, I would say master your drawing. Mostly because you will have to be versatile in this day and age, and you might find yourself using your abilities to act, emote, perform with characters you're posing in storyboards or character designs. So having a good drawing base, I think, is essential to keep you versatile. Equally, though, if you want to animate well, you cannot be held back by your drawing. That's the advantage that, you know, animating in CG, you get a rig, so the drawing, of course, keeping the character emotionally on model is also a challenge in CG animation, but at least the drawing is always done for you. But if you're if you struggle with drawing hands, if you struggle with drawing your character from any angle, your performances will be limited because you can't get your character to look up in this way. You'd have to get them to, you wouldn't be able to do those drawings. So I would say make sure that your drawing is solid, that you're comfortable with it. Definitely make sure that you learn programs that are used, because any production, if you're going to have a job, any production will be using a certain software. So make sure that you're learning that 2D software that you would need. But I would say, for the most part, I'd say just work hard and just be good at animating. Because if you're good at animating and you understand what animation is, to me that's not limited to any type of media. That's just understanding movement and how the brain processes movement, how the brain sees an image and recognizes it. And so if you understand animation and you understand good animation techniques and you understand character performance and you understand body mechanics and you can draw very well, those tools will carry you through your entire career, whatever you choose to do with it. So I think that would be my advice, and to love it, because I wouldn't recommend getting into this industry because you think it's cool and only for that reason. Do it because you love it, and that's going to, I think, carry you through everything that challenges you in this industry. So I'd say that's my starting out advice. So right now I'm kind of, I'm trying to create a breakdown that works in 3D and in 2D. So often I try to use the shape deformation as my first initial guide, but then equally I need to keep the structural integrity or believability of this little sack of flour that I'm animating. So when I do these breakdowns, I kind of think on those two planes. And that's, I think, part of the fun with 2D is that you can create these little shape changes and deformations and stuff, and you're not restricted at the beginning. I'm doing a little jump with this flour sack. Arcs is obviously at the beginning of it. I always try to arc or path of action that the character will take as they jump. So we have him kind of coming up this way. I'm also employing, so let's come back to my first image. So here's our little flour sack. I'm employing stretch and squash. So I've already done some breakdowns here. So here I've got him in his neutral, and he's going to squash, down to anticipate this big jump action. Once I've established these two keys, I do try to think about how do I want to break down this action. And because he is going down, I think about the body mechanics involved. And this is, ironically, even though this is a flour sack, this is where life drawing and body mechanics come in. So I think about how his pelvis and hips are starting this action. So when he's here in my first key pose, and then here going to my next key pose, it's the hips that are going to pull him back. So I think about that, and I also think about the fact that because he's going down, I want to anticipate him going up, because every action always should have an anticipation. In this case, I want it to be subtle because I didn't want it to be over too obvious or too linear. So I'm initiating that his hips are starting to pull him that way, but that he's going to he's going to stretch up a little bit here as a little breath before he goes down. So that's how I designed this next breakdown, is by initiating the hips but lifting the upper body. And then my next breakdown from there is more of a direct breakdown where the hips will continue to move forward and the upper body is dragging as he falls forward. So we've got basically of our Disney, I have my Illusion of Life right here, which has all the Disney principles in it. Where's my, here we go, sorry. Here we go. So we've got our squash and stretch, we've got our anticipation, our staging, which I forgot to say, but that would be my planning as well, and like staging the whole scene. I'm doing keyframe. So I do have follow through and overlapping action because I've staggered the, it's such a simple action, but I've staggered the drag. There's a drag on the upper body, which will follow through as he transitions into the next pose. I've got my arcs. I've got my slow in and slow out because he's decelerating into this squash. And then obviously, hopefully with timing, spacing will be when I execute the action, and I hope my drawings are solid and have appeal in them as well. So I'm trying to incorporate all of the principles basically in this action, but I find that anything that you do, even the bouncing ball, is going to incorporate everything. So, so that's what I've got here. So he's gonna come down, and then I've got him starting to initiate his way into the jump. I've got this stretch that I feel could be a bit more dynamic. I'm honestly not very happy with this stretch pose, but then he'll come up to the top of his arc here, and then here he's going to start to come down. And I always try to avoid symmetry, not just in my poses, but even in the scene. So even in an action like this, I don't want the descending stretch pose of this jump to be the same as the ascending pose. I find that it just makes it a little bit more visually interesting. So I try to think about that when I design my poses. So here I'm just gonna do a breakdown now because I've got to get him to come between these two poses. And breakdowns in this case, because this is a very like linear, it literally is the bouncing ball, right? So when he's at the top here and then we have our stretch, the breakdown would be kind of at a halfway point. But it's still a breakdown and not an in-between for me because I want to make some decisions about possibly which foot is coming up first or how this is handled. So I might want to start maybe lifting this side of the flour sack like a little bit more, like this foot's coming up and this one's maybe dragging down. More often than not, I kind of jumped ahead with this, but more often than not, I would do this in my thumbnailing decision making, is deciding like how do I want these drawings to all look. So I try to work that out here in my breakdown, and then my in-between can be a bit more straightforward. Now I can just go in and in-between it. And the in-betweens are equally, as much as the breakdowns add some diversity to the action, the in-betweens are important because they're what make the action smooth, and they let us even out these transitions so that there's a smooth and I guess like seamless integration between the poses and the silhouettes. So that's kind of a little bit of how I like to approach these scenes. And then I'll do one more breakdown here. So I have my descending stretch drawing. So I'm gonna need a breakdown. And again, I tend to work, it's almost like 1D to 2D to 3D. I find that movement for me is based on two-dimensional understanding. Everything is silhouettes that we see. Rotation isn't so much, or structured isn't what moves. It's actually just a silhouette of the animation that's moving. So I try to get the right silhouette first, and then once that's established, I try to think about the structure and make sure that that's solid. And that's kind of where all of your drawing and draftsmanship come in with 2D, though, because in order to take risks with your 2D shapes and make sure that they're on track, you need to have a really strong level of draftsmanship. Because otherwise, you know, if you don't have a strong level of draftsmanship, you could just draw like a really flat shape and you're playing with shapes. But if you really understand structure, then even a flat shape, it might have a little bit more, you know, sculpting to it or things like that. So I try to think about things like that as I do these breakdowns, and then again, like I said, my in-between is just going to be very, very straightforward. So, see between here and here. I'm super fast in betweening. But yeah, but being fast, like all of this stuff, you know, the messiness, like we can fix that after. I really love to see what I'm drawing, and I very rarely do a drawing by itself. Like I always, like what I'm doing here, like my drawings have to move. I can't really, let's see how many of these I can roll over. Just a little, so it's all just really, really quick little drawings in sequence. I'll do the beginning. I can only do 5 at a time like this, but and then here's our beginning sequence.